There are going to be some people who like video, but maybe want to gravitate toward TikTok. There'll be other people that maybe they're more verbal and they just prefer podcasts. They don't necessarily want to be on a camera. Maybe they just prefer being in person. You know your personality. Just figure out what that is and then find the medium that matches your personality.
Welcome to the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. I'm Sarah Rosette.
And I'm Jamie Albright. And this week on the show we have
Michael LaRonn and Matty Dalrymple.
Yes, we do. Another twofer.
Yes. So, yeah. Doing the pairs all of a sudden.
Yeah.
This was a great interview. They have a book out that they wrote together about creating a platform and speaking, their recommendations for building a platform. And we talked a lot about matching your platform to your personality. So like if you're an introvert, there are a lot of tips and good information in this interview for introverts.
It's a really great interview. Michael's so knowledgeable and he's been around for a long time. I remember when I started, I watched some of his YouTube stuff that had been, he'd been doing it for a little while.
And Maddie's been doing a podcast for so long. She's interviewed so many people and has so much knowledge, and she speaks at conferences. They both do.
Yeah.
So they have, yeah, we get into that. And we talked to them a little bit about how they wrote the book, their collaboration process too.
Yeah. I would ask you what you've been doing this week, but I know because I was with you.
We did everything together.
We did.
Pretty much. We went to the Strengths Conference, the Better Faster Conference in Minnesota. We're back from that. And it was great. Yeah. And it was just, I learned a lot. And
I did too.
I was thinking about, I don't know how I could summarize it, actually.
I know. I've thought the same. I mean, the biggest thing I took away, I think, was I'm not broken. And I know everybody go, well, of course you're not broken, but I have felt broken. And like, because of what my dominant strengths are, and because they are so dominant that I couldn't get unbroken. Yeah. But
it's like you've changed your thinking a little bit, right?
Yes. Well, first of all, I'm not broken. Like I'm reacting exactly the way someone who has been through what I've been through in the last really 4 years, but 2 for sure, would act that had my strengths. But also I can get to the balcony of those strengths and kind of get past it. It's a process, but
it is. But I think you have some ideas on how to do that. And I have some ideas on how to just get better, the things that I'm good at. And I mean, we can talk about this more, but it was really good. And it wasn't just about strengths. Claire Taylor was also there and talked about the Enneagram. Right. And then I had to come back early, but Crystal did a thing on branding, right?
Yeah, it was really good. Just kind of about leaning into your strengths and knowing, kind of what your strengths are. But one thing she said, which kind of goes against what a lot of people say, including myself, but she made a very good point, was waiting to
market,
to decide your brand.
Oh, like if you write one book
before you write,
maybe don't.
Write a couple of books, see where you really do land in the market, and then think about your brand.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was really interesting because I had not thought about that. But of course, her strengths lean more towards waiting and being patient. Mine do not. So,
well, I mean, you have to have something when you start out. You have to have some sort of idea, but maybe you can finalize it later, because we have talked to so many people who say, I wrote this and I wrote this, and then I found my home, in X genre. So yeah, I could see how there could be some truth to that.
It was so good. I mean, it was small. It was, I met new people, saw some people.
Me too.
For a while, but it was great. It was great to see people who
listen to the podcast. Yeah.
Kitty and Sarah and Leela and Vanessa and Willow. Thank you so much for listening. And
it was great to put faces to names and just talk about writing and strengths with everyone. It was a lot of fun.
It was great meeting these people in person and hanging out. We had lunch with them. That was awesome. And just really, and Maria, she had lunch with us too.
Yeah.
yeah, so it was
We had
wonderful.
a great time. Yeah. Highly recommend. 5 stars.
Yeah, 5 stars for sure.
Yeah.
And we got a little cooler weather.
That's right. It was cold for us, but people who live there were probably laughing at us as they wore their shorts.
Yeah, shorts and t-shirts.
Yes. That is basically our update. I don't have anything else besides that, except I did see the Northern Lights.
You did?
From Houston. I couldn't believe it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because I heard that they were visible, and I was like, well, I'll just go see. And I walked down the driveway, and I was like, you know what? The sky, used my compass app on my phone. I was like, the sky doesn't look as dark over here as it does to the south. Here. And I thought, I took a picture, couldn't see anything because sometimes, you can see it better on a picture. And I thought, I'll just drive into the neighborhood and get away from as many lights as I can. And there's a pond area way deep in the neighborhood. And I went down there, pitch black all around me. I get out of my car and I could see it. It was just a little faint pink. I mean, it wasn't dramatic like some pictures that you saw online. It wasn't like that, but it did show up. I could tell it was there. It was wild.
Amazing. Yeah. Okay. Now we have to talk about the fact that you don't listen to true crime, and what true crime junkie would go to a pond where it's pitch dark at night. No, Sarah, no. I don't care how pretty the Northern Lights are.
There was nobody else there. I was totally safe.
Famous last words.
Well, I'm here to say them, so they weren't my last words. Just a bunch of other geeks out there looking at the sky. If there's anyone,
that was cool. That's cool. Well, I haven't done.
So that was funny.
Yeah,
and I thought
I haven't done much since I got home. I actually, had just kind of. It took me a couple of days to recover. So, yeah. But I am going tonight to have dinner with Trudy J and Cheryl from the Spa Girls podcast. Yay. I'm super excited about that, and a couple of other Kiwis, and so I'm very excited to see them. The last time Trudy came in to town they're here for Rant at the end of this week,
which is Romance Author Mastermind.
Yes, Trudy stayed with me, and I think Tug humped her so much she just is afraid to come.
She's like, I'll just stay in the hotel this time.
I'll just stay in the hotel. Yeah. So
that's funny.
Welcome to Texas.
That's right. And if you haven't listened to the podcast for a long time, Tug is Jamie's dog.
Yes.
Just clarify that.
Not my son or my husband. Yeah. Which would be another kind of podcast altogether.
Yes.
Anyway. And then, of course, Trudy and Cheryl are on the Spa Girls podcast. So can listen to them too. But yeah, so we'll get on with the interview because it's great. And
we do have one other thing we need to talk about. With the writing sprints, we're going to put them on hold because we have lots of travel for both of us coming up. So we're going to put that on hold for now. Just wanted to let y'all know. And if you do want to support the podcast, you can go to wishidknowthenforwriters.com/support, and you get all the back episodes and access to the Slack group. And we just appreciate everyone who has supported the podcast. So thank you.
We do.
And we also have we have a text. We had asked, what is your biggest struggle? And we got one from Raleigh, North Carolina. It says, my biggest struggle is affording the professional services I need to finish and polish a book before publishing, the different types of editing, book cover design, etc. I want to make my book as polished as possible before putting it out in the world, but paying for those services feels daunting. And I understand that. It can be very expensive investment when you don't know what your return is going to be.
Right. But, okay, so how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So let's start with the cover. You can get a pre-made cover for under $100 somewhere. It may not match the cover. I mean, it may not match
of your dreams.
Yeah. The cover of your dreams, or if you've got a second book coming out, that may be holding you up. Like, I need one that matches, but you don't have to worry about that right now. If you need a cover, you can get a pre-made cover for less than $100, and they're not terrible. They're good enough for right now. You can save and to get your editing. An edit is going to cost, unless you write epic fantasy, $300 to $500, depending on who you get. It can cost more than that, but I think you could get a decent edit for
Mm-hmm.
that. Or you could barter with someone.
That's what I was going to say, barter.
If you have, expertise in something else, barter with somebody. Or you could see about getting some alpha readers to read it. I would do 3 probably if you get them and get them to correct things. So those are
you could use people like friends, family for copy editing or for proofreading, especially. You probably want to get a copy editor. But if you want, you could have that final pass or 2 done just by readers, and they can help you find all the typos and stuff. And that can save you some money. So and it can be expensive. And what you could do is start smaller, like you were saying, get a pre-made cover and find a economical copy editor. And then as you release the book and as you make money, you can go back and change the cover.
Absolutely.
It's not written in stone.
It's not. And, you could get I don't know where you're at in the world, but if you live in the US, you can sell plasma. I did that. You can take a few shifts a week, even if with a day job, with Uber Eats or something like that.
Delivering pizza or something for tips.
Yes, deliver pizzas for tips. We got to think outside the box, people. And I get it. We're tired. We have families. We don't have time. So that might not work for you. But.
And it may be the answer is just save up and take some time. And that is hard to do. But sometimes that's, if your life is already packed, sometimes that's the best way to do it.
Yep. And the opportunity to publish will still be there. So, if you need to wait 6 months and save up a little bit of money every week or every month, don't go out to eat.
Yeah.
For lunch or whatever, take your lunch and save that money, whatever, to do that. And what's the other one? Copy edits, line edits, proofreading.
Those are the big expenses, I think. Yeah.
Because you can format it on a free format platform like that Draft to Digital. Entrepreneur has. If you wanted to pay, if you have a Mac and you wanted to use Vellum, you can do it 1 book at a time. I don't remember how much it is.
It's like a flat fee for just a nominal
flat fee. Yeah,
it's not too bad.
So, but there are free resources for that.
So hopefully that helps a little bit. And I would love to hear how people paid for their early drafts and copy edits and covers. Let us know if you have a creative way of getting this done.
Yeah.
All right.
There's always garage sales. Yeah.
Garage sales. Yes. You can make some good money in garage sales. Facebook Marketplace.
Just be safe. Yeah. All right.
Says the true crime listener. All right. Well, we should get on with the interview.
All right.
Really excited to have Matty Dalrymple and Michael LaRonn.
Hey, guys.
How are y'all?
Hello. Lovely to be here.
Yeah. This is going to start being a thing, I guess. Two guests and 2 hosts.
The more the merrier.
Matty Dalrymple writes suspense and thrillers. She also writes, speaks, consults, and podcasts on writing, craft, and publishing at the Indie Author Podcast. She serves as the campaigns manager for the Alliance of Independent Authors. LaRonn, or Michael LaRonn, writes science fiction and fantasy and self-help books for authors. He built a writing career publishing 10 to 12 books per year while raising a family, working full-time job, and attending law school. He serves as the outreach manager for Ally. So yes, I'm exhausted just reading that.
I'm exhausted too.
Yeah.
I function at like 10% brain power these days.
Well, who knows what would happen if you functioned at a higher level? We would
exactly.
We couldn't even be in the same room with you.
Exactly. So, Michael, tell us, how did you get into writing?
Yeah, so I'm one of those people that have always been a writer. I scribbled on things here and there, but I really got my start in 2012. I had a near-death experience, and it really got me to prioritize and focus on what was important. And right around that time was when self-publishing was really becoming popular. So I found Ally, the Alliance of Independent Authors. I found Joanna Penn, and I just kind of jumped into it. Science fiction, fantasy, lots of other things, and didn't look back. And fast forward, and here I am.
That's amazing. That's amazing. I love that. And I mean, I'm sorry you had a near-death experience, but I'm very glad that you channeled it in such a way that you share things with the world. That's amazing.
Matty, you've been on the podcast before. Last time was last summer, 2023. So give us a quick update of what you've been doing, what's going on with you since the last time you were on.
And your podcast.
Yeah, well, I've passed 250 episodes, so that was very exciting.
Yeah.
I've have I think all of you guys on, and lots of other of my heroes in the indie author space. So that has been super fun. It's been a super fun community building effort and learning experience and so on. So I've been focusing a lot on that. I've been continuing to work on my Ann Kinnear suspense novels and Lizzie Ballard thrillers. I have the 5th Lizzie Ballard thriller coming out later this year. And I have been also working on my nonfiction, as we'll probably be talking about. Had my second co-authoring experience, this time with Michael on being an author speaker. And I can imagine that Michael and I might have things to say about the co-authoring experience in a future book. So that is what I've been working on in the last year or so.
That's great. I love that. I love you've been so busy. And I see your podcast coming up all over the place. So
Good.
yeah, you're doing great. You're doing great. So this is a question for both of you, so you can answer. Michael, why don't you answer first, and then Matty, you can answer. But is there anything you wish you'd known about indie publishing or working with indie authors?
I think the first thing that I wish I had known a little bit more deeply is how much of a long game it is. So when I started, I kind of knew, hey, I'm in this for life, but I didn't really know what in this for life means. I mean, I'm here having done this 11 years, and I look back on the last 10 and 11 years, and man, there's so many things I wish I would have done differently. Just like thinking ahead about having a big portfolio and how to get the right readers to the right book at the right time, or evolving my marketing. And there's just, it really does mean something when you say that you're in this for the long haul. And 10 years from now, what does that look like? And I think that, I guess, I don't think I truly understood what it would mean to be an author for that long.
Right.
It's something I wish I'd known more deeply. I would have made some different decisions for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
That sounds like a podcast episode unto itself.
I was going to say, it's what maybe just one or two things. If there something comes to mind immediately, what would you do differently? Because I know people will be curious.
Branding on my covers would be the big one. So I used to release covers that had, different designs. So sometimes my name would be at the top. Sometimes my name would be at the bottom. Sometimes it would be in different fonts. And that didn't quite work out because readers didn't really know what to look for when they searched for me. So that was an expensive project to go back and rebrand all of my covers. And then just also interiors too. Like having consistent interiors and making sure that, you follow a certain process when you publish a book each time. Because I was kind of a shoot from the hip kind of person. When a book was done, I just kind of get it out there. But I have had to learn to be a little bit more deliberate about how everything goes through the meat grinder. So just kind of slowing down a little bit and really focusing on the things that are important.
Yeah. I think you do have, when you're first starting, you're learning a lot and you're taking a lot in. And then as you get going in it, you realize, oh, I should make this a system. I should make this consistent. And sometimes you have to backtrack and redo.
Yeah.
That's very common.
And painful.
And expensive.
Yeah.
Which is painful. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you, Matty?
I would say that what I wish I had learned and continue to wish I learned, because I think this is something you just have to learn through your whole career. It's not something that you suddenly have an aha moment, is that balance between trying things but not spreading yourself too thin. And so I do feel as if it's sort of like that old culture, I think at Google, I don't think they do this anymore, but there was that culture where you'd have to do, the business work of the company 4 days a week. And then on the fifth day, you could work on whatever you wanted to. And I think there's a real lesson to be learned from authors there that you should not try to do everything while still reserving a little bit of time to try new things, because it's this balance between you don't want to get stuck in a rut, but you don't want to make yourself crazy by doing too many things. And this was really brought home to me lately because I finally got tired of unsuccessfully trying to manage the finances of my company. And a friend of mine who's been a lifelong finance person finally retired. And I finally talked her into becoming my business manager. And not only can she pull the levers on QuickBooks much more effectively than I can, but it forced me to talk through my business with someone. And it's kind of silly because it's not even like I was telling her things that I didn't know. It was just I was telling her things that I hadn't had to verbalize in a certain way. And it became really clear where the most profitable parts of my author business lay and where the least profitable parts of my author business lay. And my time allocation and money allocation was not reflecting that effectively. And yet I don't want to say, this is the one thing I see as profitable, or this is the one thing I see as whatever is measuring up to the measure of what I want to be achieving. I'm just going to do that. And so reserving some time to experiment with things, but just realizing that you always have to be stepping back and saying, what am I doing that's taking me forward? And how can I double down on that? And what are the things I'm doing that are just busy work and distracting me from my core skills, my core experience, and find ways of jettisoning that. And I just think that's something I would be learning for the rest of my career. But the earlier you recognize that that's something you have to do, the better.
Yeah, exactly. I love that you really have recognized that and you're taking that step, you've taken those steps. That's really great.
I think that's a lifelong balancing act that we're all trying to do. Tell us about your book, From Page to Platform, How to Succeed as an Author Speaker. So first tell us, how did it come about? So maybe Michael, you take this one to start off.
Sure. So Matty and we both have traveled extensively for speaking because we both have independent platforms. Maddie's got her podcast and I have a YouTube channel and I've done podcasting as well. And so we happened to meet on the podcast, or not podcast, but the speaking circuit. And we were in New York City and we were I think it was over dinner one night. We were trading war stories about things that we had seen as speakers. And I think I mentioned that, all this stuff would be really cool to put in a book. And Maddie was like, yeah, we should write a book. And the rest was history. So we got along famously, and we have very contrasting personalities. Like Maddie is really strong where I'm not so strong. And so we complement each other really well. And so we tried to write the most comprehensive book we could about being an author speaker and everything that is involved with turning your book into a platform for being a speaker to leverage your expertise.
Matty?
The backstory that Michael told was, I look back on fondly, and I was super glad. I mean, I think it's a great illustration of one of the benefits of adding speaking to one's portfolio, because he and I would never have had that particular conversation if we hadn't both been in New York for a Writer's Digest conference presenting and being speakers at that. And so it was a really nice illustration, both of, it was kind of a meta illustration of this is what you can gain from being an author speaker. You can create an environment where you can write a book about being an author speaker or all the other things that you might want to pursue. And so, that has been a super fun process.
I love that.
And I think it's interesting because we just did an interview with two people who collaborate on fiction, and that will come out the week before this comes out. And they also mentioned the complementary roles, where one person is strong, the other person is weak, and they kind of help each other out. Jamie and I are the same way. We have different things that we're good at and we like to do. And so I think that is maybe one of the secrets to good collaboration is you find somebody who complements you, like you said.
Yeah, I think it's sort of both, because my other collaboration was with Mark Lefebvre and on Taking the Short Tack. And that to me was much more of a very clearly different perspectives. Mark is like an idea guy and he's happy to let somebody else take care of the project management side of it. So this collaboration with Michael felt much more like kindred spirits, both wonderful, but in slightly different ways. I think when you're working with someone who's quite different, then it's important for each person to be willing to let the other person take the lead on whatever their area of expertise is. And when you're working with someone who's very alike, then you have to have each person be willing to maybe give in an area that otherwise they would think of themselves as being the lead on. So I can happily say that I've had both of those experiences and they've both been great. So, you can make either one of those work if you paired up with the right person.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Yeah. Tell us more about how how you did the actual writing. Did you have a Google Doc and things like that?
Oh, yes. So we had a couple of different ways that we started writing. We Matt and I both are not big fans of Google Docs. I did a
agree.
Collaboration.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did a collaboration a couple of years ago with 3 novels with a friend of mine. And I just came away with such a distaste for Google Docs that I just could not fathom working Google Docs. So if you're not going to do that, then why not try Microsoft? And now I have a distaste for Microsoft because it didn't work very well either. So we started off using OneDrive and trying to operate inside of a single doc. And when I was working in the doc, I would tell Maddie, and so she'd stay out of it, and vice versa. And for some reason, that quite didn't work very well. So we ended up doing, I think, the age-old tradition of trading Word docs back and forth until the book was done. And that's ultimately how we got there. But we definitely had to flex a little bit on our writing methods just to make sure that we were able to get there.
Yeah. Whenever we talk about this, I always send the plea out to the industry that there's got to be some indie author developer out there. And can somebody please produce a writing app that's both easy to use, attractive, and supports 2 people working in it at the same time? Because as far as we can tell, that just isn't out there right now.
Yeah. It's a problem that needs to be solved. You did it old school, the trading. Did you email the documents back and forth? Is that how you did it? Or just drop it in Dropbox or something?
Oh,
we emailed it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that way you always have a backup copy of all the drafts as well. Yeah. So it has benefits too. Yeah.
There was wild backing up going on, as you can imagine. And I also found, I'm a huge fan of nautical metaphors for the writing craft. Yeah. And I always talk about a story frame, would certainly work on fiction and nonfiction. But I started developing more of sort of a sculptural metaphor, because I think you need to have the armature, but in a sculpture would be the armature, like the metal or the wooden frame that you're building on. And sometimes there's a tool that lends itself to that. Like, I was okay with dumping ideas into Google Docs because who cares what it looks like. But then you have, you're collecting the raw material, and that can kind of be done independently. But then you need one person who pats the raw material onto the armature, and then you have another person who's good at shaping it so it starts kind of looking like a person on a horse or whatever you want it to be. And that really helped me think through, we're at this point and we need this kind of tool to help us. And this is the person who's best at this. So yeah, as you can imagine, we learned a lot from that first, which is why we think we're going to have a book on co-authoring nonfiction at some point, because we learned a ton of lessons from our experience.
Jamie and I collaborate, but not on a book. I think that could be really, it would stretch me. That's for sure.
Yesterday, when we were interviewing Lynn and Anne, they were saying they doing Google Docs, and they'll be working on it at the same time, and it moves, and oh my gosh, I love that they can do that. I don't think I could. So yeah, that would be really stressful.
I thought that one really interesting, you get really sort of intimate insights into the creative process of the other person when you're doing this. And one I think of the most, the maturing process of co-authoring is, I think early on, it would be at least this was my perspective, I would put in or I read something that Michael had provided, and he had used one word. And I was like, oh, is it okay if, could we consider changing this one word to something else? I think you have to get to the point where, track changes is beautiful, because you can just go ahead and change it. And if the other person doesn't agree with it, that you can talk about it then, but you can really get yourself bogged down if you get kind of too precious about negotiating every single little thing. And I think a successful collaboration is one where that agreement emerges, where you're both sort of comfortable with what the other person's going to do with your work when you turn it over to them.
Yeah, there's something to be said about just making sure directionally that everything is moving in the right step. So like when we started, it was, okay, Maddie's going to take these chapters. I'm going to take these chapters. There's a group of chapters we're just going to leave until the end because we don't know where we're going to go, and we'll stitch them together at the end. And, we talked about it. Okay, so for the travel chapter, directionally, Maddie would give me her feedback on what she would want to put in the chapter, and then I would go in that direction. And then I would give it back to her, and she would read it and say, okay, is this what we agreed on? I don't know if this quite works. Maybe we could go a different path. And so really, when we were trading things back and forth, I was always thinking about that. Like, what's the reader on the other end of the page going to be? How are they going to be perceiving what we're talking about? And really, at the end of the day, yes, words are important, but it's also about how you put them together.
Correct.
Without, like Matty said, being too precious about it. Because at the end of the day, as long as the message is there, then it's going to be received.
Right. Tell us, what are the best ways for an author to develop a platform? Michael, you want to take this?
Yeah, I would say the best way to develop a platform, at least how I started, was to not be afraid to talk to a wall.
Yeah.
When no one is listening. So when I started podcasting and YouTubing, I didn't think anybody would watch my videos. So I just had some fun. I would make the videos that I wanted to make, and I would pretend like I had an audience of 100,000, and I put all the time and energy into it. And I would literally be in my basement staring at a camera, which was in front of a wall. And then I would upload it. And I did the same thing with podcasting. And I was just never afraid to do that, because I think ultimately when you're building a platform, you're building it in a way on your personality, and people engage with your content because they like your personality. Right. So if you could find ways to get your personality to shine through, that really boils down to creating content that you enjoy.
Right.
And if you can't build a platform on that, then it gets hard, because then you have a golden handcuff problem, because you can build a platform that is really successful and has a lot of listens and affiliate income and whatever. But if you don't enjoy it and you get out of bed every day and you don't want to do it, that's not really a problem you want to have, at least for me personally.
Yeah, that's like a different kind of desk job. Like you just created another, like a lot of people go into writing because they don't want to do the 9 to 5. But if you create that for yourself in another way, then you're just moving from one thing to another that you don't like.
Exactly. That sounds a lot like what I'm doing with my social media. I just pretend people are watching. They're not actually, on TikTok, 250 people. That's about it. That's about all I get.
Make it till you make it.
That's right. That's right. Matty, do you have anything to add to that? The best way for an author to develop a platform?
Yeah, I agree with everything Michael said, and I'm also going to add a completely different perspective, which is that one of the strengths of becoming a speaker is that you can do platform building where you're not talking to a wall. And so I know as a podcaster, even as a writer, you work on this content, you send it out, everybody here can sympathize with this, and sometimes it's crickets, and you're thinking, did nobody listen to that episode? Yeah, exactly. You look at the stats, you're like, look, some people listen to it is kind of like screaming into the void. And so I think becoming a speaker is sort of the other end of the spectrum of that especially if you're doing in-person events, you're standing up in front of a group of people and you can look out into the audience and you can see if they're engaged, you can see if they're sitting forward. If they're not, you can do something about it in the moment to get them involved. And it can be very therapeutic, I think. A lot of, I hate to lean too heavily on the authors or introverts thing, but there's a reason that many of us have chosen this as a profession. And it's scary for, everybody says that public speaking is like the number one phobia of people. And there's a reason for it, but there's also a huge benefit in terms of being able to create a platform with that very personal, direct, interactive kind of community building that you can do from a stage.
Right.
Yeah, that's great, Matty. And one of the other things too is that speaking in person or on podcasts and then speaking, on your own platform, they kind of feed off of each other. So a lot of the speaking events that I got were because somebody happened to see a YouTube video that I did 10 years ago or 8 years ago. So I put it out into the void, didn't think anything of it. And then all of a sudden that became the basis for a talk in person. Right. So So doing that, it almost becomes this weird cycle. Like you do more on your platform, that leads to more speaking. You do more speaking, that feeds into your platform because, as Matty said, you know what works. You know when you're hitting the bullseye when you're in front of people, right? So it becomes this really good feedback loop. But you got to start one way or the other in order to be able to build that loop.
Maddie, since you mentioned introverts, a lot of writers are introverts. So let's talk about that for a little bit, because when I hear the word platform, I immediately think of speaking in front of people. But you're right. It can be, like Michael was saying, like a YouTube channel or a podcast where you have that connection, but it's not in person. I feel like that would be less intimidating or less stressful for introverts. So can you talk to us about just like the different types of platforms that people can have, and maybe which would appeal like to people who don't want to do the speaking? Because I know a lot of people are going to be like, no, I'm not interested in that right off the bat.
Yeah, we cover a bunch of different things. I think when people think about speaking engagements, they think of that traditional, like I'm standing in front of a group of people with a PowerPoint and I'm standing on the lectern or standing on the podium. And we cover that, certainly, but we also cover not the usual suspects of things like author readings or panels and things like that. One of the areas that we dive into in a lot of detail because of our background is being a podcast guest. And I think that that's a really good entree for people, because it's if you have a skilled interviewer, then they can make it easy for you. If you go into it with, well prepared and with that idea that you have a responsibility to provide interesting fodder for the podcast host, but going in there and having it feel like a one-on-one conversation, you can kind of put it out of your mind. Again, it's one of those things it's sort of a dichotomy that you have to put it out of your mind, that you might end up having dozens or hundreds or thousands or tens or thousands of people listening to you, but also realizing that eventually you're going to have tens of thousands of people listening to you. And so you have to bring that same level of professionalism and focus and engagement, regardless of how many people you're talking to on a Zoom call. But I think that can be a really good way to get started there, maybe get over some butterflies, hone your message, and have a friendly face on the other side of the camera to be having that conversation.
Great answer.
I always encourage people to match the medium to your personality. So so first and foremost, the people who are listening to, who are going to be receptive to what Maddie and I are saying, are a smaller group in the subset of authors, right? Because as you said, Sarah, there are going to be some people that just say, yeah, nope, hard pass. I'd rather blog. I'd rather do nothing, totally fine. But for
I'd
those
rather
who,
lock myself in the basement for a
right.
Yeah, I'd rather have a gerbil gnaw off my arm. I mean, there's all sorts of things that people would say. No, I don't want to speak at all, because it is a big fear. But for those people who do have the ears to kind of hear what we're saying, there are different ways that you can get yourself out there. And I encourage people to match their personality to the medium. So there are some people like me who are not afraid to get on camera. And for those people, YouTube could be a very effective way to get your message out there. There are going to be some people who like video, but maybe want to gravitate toward TikTok. There'll be other people that maybe they're more verbal and they just prefer podcasts. They don't necessarily want to be on a camera, or people that maybe they just prefer being in person. Your personality. Just figure out what that is and then find the medium that matches your personality, because then when you do that, it makes it so much easier to be receptive, or for people to receive what you're trying to say. Because I think we've all watched people that have tried to podcast because they thought podcasting was hot and it's kind of a dud. Or you've watched people that are on YouTube or TikTok because somebody told them they had to be there, and it's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. And so just match the medium to your personality, and it just makes it so much easier. It makes it more enjoyable.
I mean, I prefer public speaking to podcasting and or social media, because you get the immediate feedback from the audience, where with social media and even podcasting, you don't get that immediate feedback. You don't, you don't know who laughed, who didn't laugh, what joke landed, what joke didn't land, what point landed, what point didn't land. And sometimes you never know, sometimes they let you know those things. But so for me, I prefer public speaking. to those things, even though I love podcasting. So,
and it's also a plea to all the listeners out there. If you really like something, just drop us a note and let us know.
yes.
Like, what do you see authors doing that they do because they think they have to, but they aren't producing results when it comes to platform? So let's see, Matty, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, sort of harking back to what I'd said earlier, social media. So just right before this conversation with my business manager, I went through the stats for all the platforms where it's possible to, where I have a presence and it's possible to track stats. And I've been doing that, I've been doing it for a while, but I wasn't, today was the day I said, you know what, I'm just never going to bother going on Twitter or Instagram again.
Yeah.
Because, and I think it ties in with what Michael was saying, it's because, one, because I kind of want to limit the amount of time I spend on social media, but I just don't understand them. I just don't understand it. Like, I don't know how many times I would go on Twitter and I would, I'd say, oh, look, a notification. Oh, look, somebody said that they liked a podcast episode. I have no idea how to figure out what post they were responding to. Like, it's just out there. And I couldn't understand how to interact with people productively against all the other problems with Twitter. So I think that people feel like they have to be on social media a lot, which I don't think is true. And I also think that, fortunately, I think this is a trend that there used to be definitely a message you have to be everywhere. And I don't think that's true. I think that engagement and quality of interaction is much more important than quantity. And I've heard arguments on both sides, and I've heard some valid arguments for why you should at least have a presence of some sort on lots of different platforms. But for me, it just didn't feel right. And so I think that if you can step back and say, I'm really not enjoying this, what is the price I'm going to pay for just stopping doing it? And in some cases, you might say, oh, you know what? I have pretty good engagement. I might lose some people. I might lose some book sales. Is it worth it? And you have to make that decision. And sometimes you step back and you're like, I'm getting nothing from this. And I'm spending hours and hours a week, nurturing this little plant that has never given me any fruit. So again, take the time to take a step back and look and see where you're getting results and where you're not getting results, and also factor in what's the emotional payment you're making in order to try to do something that you're just not enjoying doing.
All good points.
Mm-hmm. What are the most common mistakes you see when it comes to author platform and speaking? Why don't we split those up? One, building a platform. What are the common mistakes in building a platform? And then what are the common mistakes in speaking? Michael?
The biggest mistake in building a platform is not understanding the basics of how people consume content on the internet. So I have a theory, like whenever people want to do something for the first time, they have a lobotomy. So like when you want to become a writer, you have a lobotomy, and everything you ever read, everything, all your opinions that you ever had as a reader, just completely, it's like they never existed. So you do things that you as a reader would never put up with or tolerate. Yes. And that's just it's a rite of passage. And it's the same thing when you become a speaker and you build a platform, you do things that you yourself as an audience member would never put up with. For example, when you're creating content that's going to be consumed, you got to remember, people have the attention span of a goldfish. So when you're writing email content, you've got to be quick. You've got to get to the point. When you're creating a podcast, you've got to let people know the value of what they're going to get up front. It's the same thing with the video. And people just don't have the time or are going to be interested in watching a super duper long video where you don't get to the point and you don't give them actionable tips. So that would be my big thing, is just really remembering how you yourself as a consumer watch content and consume the very type of content that you're wanting to create, because it's really easy to forget that.
Wow. That's such good advice. And I am guilty of that, especially with my TikTok videos. I mean, not always, but I have some that are super funny, but they're super long. They're too long. I know they're too long. And it's like when I'm editing them, I don't want to cut things out. So yeah, good point.
Yeah, we're all guilty of it. It happens.
Yeah. And newsletters that have section after section after section, like in my newsletter when I send it out, I'm like, that's too many. I don't need 7 sections, maybe 1 or 2 at the most.
Exactly.
Well, Matty, what are the biggest mistakes or the most common mistakes you see people making when it comes to like their speaking engagements and stuff like that? Like when they're speaking?
Well, when they're speaking, I have a whole list we could go over, but I also wanted to jump off on the platform building idea.
Yeah,
and
sure.
My thought on that is I'm going to use a speaking specific example, but this is really generalizable to any environment where you're like interacting with other human beings. And that is that this is also true for podcast interviews, I believe. And you guys can confirm or deny my own experience that people put a ton of time into putting together their pitch letter and then getting the contact information and sending it out and then following up. And then maybe they get the gig and they're preparing, let's say, their presentation if they're doing a presentation at a conference. And they get there and, maybe there's some nerves involved. They go to the room, they get up on the stage or they get in front of their virtual stage on their camera and give their presentation. Their presentation is from 1 to 2 p.m. and at 2:01, they think they're done. And I think that is in any circumstance where you've done a lot of work to achieve something and now you've like reached the pinnacle of Mount Everest and then you forget that you actually still have to get down. That's not exactly the analogy I want here, but people so greatly underutilize the value of that kind of platform building opportunity. If they then, they walk off the stage, they walk past all the people, they just listen to them talk and they go up to their hotel room and take a nap. No. Like you can I think that the beauty of a speaking engagement is not that you stand in front of people for an hour, not that you get a check for however much for having done that, but all the opportunities that builds. I mean, the fact that Michael and I ended up writing a book is exactly that kind of thing. I look back at all the conferences I've been to where I've presented, and I think of all the things that came out of those conferences that were completely independent of the payoff I got for that particular talk or a sales spike for a particular book that was associated with a talk or whatever it is. And I think that people need to go into this saying, my goal of this effort is not to land the opportunity to give a talk at this conference, let's say. My goal is to form a set of relationships that is going to pay me back in creatively and business-wise and financially and personally. And I think that part of it is really undervalued. And I think that is generalizable to almost any other interaction that people have. If you go into it saying, what is the bigger value I can get out of this? And what is the bigger value I can give back too? Because I also think back to all those interactions. And I can think of examples where I was able to support someone else financially or business-wise or creatively or personally or whatever. So looking at the big picture and not being so narrowly focused on the specific deliverable that you just happen to land.
Mm.
That's a great point, Matty. And I'll piggyback off of that and say that the most important conversations you have at a speaking engagement are not when you're on stage. They're when you're in the hallway and when you're at lunch and dinner.
Yep.
And everything that happens on stage is just window dressing. I mean, now, don't get me wrong, you still need to do everything you need to do to prepare and deliver a great talk. But
right.
Building a speaking career and getting to know people and being able to provide value, that's absolutely critical. And I love that you said that, Matty, and really important and easy to forget.
I agree. And I mean, I'm not sure this is exactly what you're talking about, Matty, but I hate it when I go to conferences and there's a speaker and they speak and they leave and they go there back to, you never see them again.
They're there for like 2 hours.
You never see them again. I just hate that because 1, you're not that important. And 2, you're there to give value. Well, some of the value comes when you're conversing with other people because they have questions or they just want to share with you how much what you've said meant to them. And I think that's important. I think it's important as a speaker to be able to receive that. And sometimes it's not because they think they're so important. I think it's because they're uncomfortable. But as a speaker, you need to be able to receive that from other people because people have a need to express their gratitude for things you've said or the way it made them feel or information you gave them that they didn't have. And it's just part of being gracious as a speaker, in my opinion.
That's very well put.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll add something else. Can I tell a story?
Yes,
so
please.
There's a so when I was in college, there was a very famous author who they were trying to get to come to the college to do like a talk. And I won't name names because this would probably rock some people's world if they knew what I'm talking about. But this author, very famous, very household name, very well known.
Yeah, sure.
They wanted to get them to come, and in order for this author to come to the campus, they had to send a black car limousine service to pick this person up at the airport. They could only stay at a 5-star hotel.
Oh my God.
And they, of course, we don't even talk about the money that they wanted.
Wow.
And when the talk was over, there could only be a 5-minute question and answer session. And they would immediately get back into the black car, go back to the airport, and leave.
Wow.
Nobody wants. Don't be that prima donna.
No, don't.
That's not the kind of person you want to be. But that's what you described, Jamie.
Right.
People they fly into the talk, then they fly out,
right,
and it's not a good experience.
Right.
And so, you talk about common mistakes that people make. Just don't be a prima donna. Don't be that. Don't be that person, because it seems inevitably every conference I've been to, there's always that one person.
Yeah.
That, just if you can avoid being that person, then you will do yourself
You're off to a great start.
Yeah. And and I'm thinking about, because I've spoken at really big conferences and I've spoken at very small conferences, and I've been an attendee at a small conference where the speaker was like that, in a way, like didn't want to. I mean, you're at a small conference, there are 100 people here, and you can't answer questions, or you don't want to, like that.
Linger.
You don't want to linger. You can't do that.
Right.
You just can't do that. I mean, so anyway, that's one thing. So what about like on stage, like when you're giving your presentation, are there things that we can do, that we can think about as speakers, or that can really get our message across in a better way?
Well, I think that there are a lot of sort of mechanical things that people will probably remember from their experience in high school, speech class or whatever. And, don't read from the slides.
Yeah.
People wouldn't be paying their time and money to go watch you if they couldn't. They can all read the slides and stuff.
I hate slides. I hate making slides.
Well, I always, for myself, I usually have slides, but they are only sort of like a prompt to the audience to what the topic of that little period of time is going to be, and a prompt to myself for what to say. So it's the kind of thing where I'll glance at a slide, it would have a couple of bullet points on it, or I might have a graphic that illustrates the point, and then I can speak to that, speaking to the audience. That's the important part. And I think that there are all sorts of ways, there's sort of nuances of that. And an example I saw recently was I was at a conference where there was, the speaker was not up on the podium. They were kind of standing on the floor where all the chairs were. And there was a center aisleway through the chairs. Mm-hmm. And she was sort of walking around, which can be okay. Moving around can be an attractive and engaging kind of thing. But she kept walking further and further into the audience and staying there. And so that, let's say there were 20 rows of chairs, and she was at like row 10.
Turn around,
and all the people in rows 1 through 10 kind of, you could tell they were starting to feel a little checked out. Mm-hmm. And so you could see the people in the front, they tried to crane their neck around for a while so they could keep an eye on the speaker. And pretty soon they just started looking at their phones. Yeah. And I think that, that's unfortunate for them. But I think the even more dangerous place of speaking to a part of the audience, or even an individual person in the audience, because I think what happened with the speaker was somebody in row 11 asked her a question. And so she kind of walked up to row 11. She was talking kind of directly to that person, which made the rest of the people in the room feel left out. And that's especially dangerous if you're dealing with somebody who's kind of a heckler. And you can never let the conversation become a conversation between you and the heckler. It has to be you, like, hearing a question and then stepping back and addressing a response to the whole room. Mm-hmm. And that's true whether you're responding to a heckle, you're responding to a friendly audience, you have to take care of the whole room. You can't take care of an individual person.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Mm-hmm.
you can, maybe afterwards, if you see someone who seems confused or whatever, you could use that lingering opportunity to say, hey, you look like maybe you were having second thoughts about what I was saying.
Mm-hmm.
But making it a conversation, with the whole room, not with an individual person.
Awesome. It's
Yeah,
great.
that's
tip.
great, Maddie. Yeah, that's absolutely a great tip. And the one thing I'll share is I always like to plan my talks starting at the end. So I always like to think about the perspective of the audience, put myself in their shoes. The talk is done, they're getting up and they're walking for the door, and they feel like this is the best talk they've been to. What would get them to that point? Right? What do they need to get to that point? And then you work your way back. So then you start at the Q&A, which Maddie talked about, and then you move a little bit back further. Okay, what am I trying to do? Am I trying to sell a book? Am I trying to get some information out there? Am I trying to help them take the next step? What do they need to do that? And then you back yourself up all the way to the beginning of the talk, having started at the end. And that will help you, one, clarify everything you're going to say, because that dictates what's going to go on your slides. Right. It dictates what you're going to do on stage. It dictates, the final steps when you're at the end of the talk. And so that has always been helpful for me, because I find that when I don't do that, sometimes I wander, and that's not good for me or good for the audience.
Yeah, those are great tips. Those are wonderful. So I wanted to ask, if somebody is new to this idea of speaking in particular, or maybe doing a different type of platform like a podcast or a YouTube channel, what would be your tips for getting started? Like, where should somebody start? Michael, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I would start with two things that immediately jump to mind. The first thing is make sure that you get a good audio and video presence. If you have to spend money and you can only spend money on one, spend money on a decent entry-level podcasting microphone. A Blue Yeti, Snowball. You can never go wrong when you sing that song, because when people hear you, that's the first impression.
Yes.
That's the first impression. And you only have that one impression, and nobody wants to be the person that, you have crackly audio. It just sounds horrible in people's earbuds. Yeah. Because that's how people are going to listen to you. They're going to hear you in earbuds. So you want to invest just a little bit of money into a good audio microphone. And if cameras can be intimidating to people, and what I just encourage people is, if you have to use your phone, just use your phone. But, try not to use the built-in webcam on your computer or on your, on your devices. But an entry-level podcasting webcam, just find out what people are using for Zoom calls and things like that. And that will give you a good first impression when people see you and when they hear you. And that goes a long way. And then the second thing, just real quick, is don't be afraid to put together a press reel or a speaker's reel. So dress for the job you want. So what's stopping you from putting together a talk, recording it with recording app on your computer, and pretending like it was a talk, and then taking the best clips from that and slicing them together into a demo reel so that people know what it would be like to hire you. So dress for the job you want, and you'd be surprised.
The advice I would have for people starting out, even backing up from that, is understanding what your goals for your speaker career are. And so, as an example, I mean, we probably don't have time to get into how this would play out, but let's say that you have just written a book on fly fishing and you're very excited about getting word out about your fly fishing book to as many people as possible. Your approach there is going to be different than if you are a member of a nonprofit organization that's supporting research into addressing an illness, and you need to engage people to contribute money to that cause. The approach you take is going to be different. If you're looking to make an emotional connection with people, then you're probably going to be favoring in-person events. If you're looking to spread information, then virtual events can be very good. You need to factor in things like, how much money do you have to invest in this? Because early in your speaker career, it's going to be more of an investment than it is going to be a money earner. You have to consider things like, what do you want just generally, what are your goals? Are you looking long-term to earn money? Are you looking long-term as a learning experience? Because a lot of times if you're a speaker at a conference, you get to attend the conference for free. And so, there can be benefits that come along with that. Are you looking to expand your audience of fellow writers in addition to an audience of fellow readers? The list goes on and on.
Right.
And so I would recommend that if people are thinking through this for themselves, if they go to theindieauthor.com, and it's indie with a Y, I-N-D-Y, theindieauthor.com/platform, and then scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a document there called Speaker's Notes that summarizes the questions at the end of each of the chapters of the book. But you can answer the questions even without having the book. And it walks you through some of these questions, like early on, what are the questions you need to be considering? And that is going to help point you in the direction of the type of presentation, the type of engagement that you want to pursue.
So good. Thank you. And just to put this out there, I don't know, but I doubt Sarah is part of this group, but Michael, Matty, and I would love to speak at your next event. So thank you very much.
Yes, please. Thank you.
I'll be on your podcast.
I was going to say, Sarah, not so much. But
see how one opportunity leads to another?
Yes, exactly.
That's right.
Exactly. Well, we have just appreciated you guys being here so much. Are there any final thoughts you would want to leave our audience with, or anything from that we haven't covered that you wanted to cover today?
Yeah, we should mention the title of the book, Matty. For those who are interested in picking up the book that we co-authored, it's From Page to Platform: How to Succeed as an Author Speaker. And we can just give the books to read link. It's just bookstoread.com/from page to platform.
Great. We'll have that in the show notes and people can grab it. And so we have appreciated y'all being here so much, and tell everybody where they can find out more about you and all that, and invite you to speak and all those things.
Yes, you can contact me to invite me to speak if you go to theindieauthor.com, indie with a Y, I-N-D-Y, and you'll find information on all my writing, podcast, newsletter articles, other things. And if people are interested in my fiction work, they can go to mattydalrymple.com, and that's Matty with a Y, M-A-T-T-Y.
Great. Michael?
Yeah, and if you're interested in all of the YouTube and writing-y things I've got going on, you can find me at authorlevelup.com. Got links to all my books and speaking and all that stuff for writers. And if you're interested in my fiction, you can find me at michaellarron.com.
Very good. Very good. Thank you guys for being here. We have appreciated it so much.
Thank you. This has been super fun.
Well, we will have all those links in the show notes. We'll see everybody next week.
Bye.